Everyone, and welcome to June's Bhavana chat. I'm Shay with Curate Soul, and it's so good to have you here. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and inquire about this month's Bhavana. For those of you that have been with me, you know that we are exploring the second Purushartha. The Purushartha are the four aims of mankind, or the four desires of the soul. And so all year long, we are exploring each one in kind of like 3-month segments. And we've explored Dharma already, which is often translated as purpose or responsibility, can also be translated as alignment with nature or even cosmic order. And artha, the second one, is often translated as means or wealth. And it is anything that allows us or supports us or is a tool that allows us to uphold our dharma, to fulfill our purpose here. And so often when we look at artha and see translations like wealth, it may be our first kind of inclination to go to monetary wealth. And that certainly is part of artha. But there are many other aspects of artha as well. And I've really been leaning into kind of the more subtle aspects, the ones that are maybe intangible and have a little more to do with our psychology or the philosophy of yoga. And so we are in the last month of this exploration of the second Purushartha. We've explored the definitions, the translations, how it applies to us as an individual as well as a collective. We've also looked at artha through the lens of Ayurveda, yoga's sister science, and how Ayurveda is an artha. It's a tool for us to live a healthy and vital life. And this month, I am really leaning into the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Specifically, I will be using some language and some of the translations from one of my favorite translations, The Secret Power of Yoga by Nishkala Joy Devi. Let me show you the name here. So beautiful, beautiful translation of the sutras. And I am first wanting to explore the kleshas. And klesha is often translated as veil or covering. In yogic philosophy, it's the kleshas that create the suffering of mankind. There are 5, and we're going to speak to 2 of those, or I'm going to speak to 2 of those today, and mainly because they're actually 2 different sides of the same coin. The first one is raga, which is translated as attachment, desire, addiction, or passion. And so this is not to say that desire is bad. I'm going to spend a whole year talking about desire. But this desire, raga, is the desire that creates an attachment to something that is ego-based, that is ego-driven. Whereas the purushartha, those are the desires of the soul, the true self. So that divine part of our nature. So raga is separate from that. This desire of raga is that one that creates suffering because we label that desire good or bad. We feel like we have to get this thing that we desire, do this thing that we desire to find value or worth within ourselves. And it's that illusion, that klesha, that veil, that covering of that desire attached to the ego self that creates the suffering. We're longing for that pleasure, that ego pleasure. The flip side of that coin is the vesha, which is aversion. And so where you find raga, desire or attachment, you also find the vesha, aversion to something. So for instance, if you are desiring food, you have an aversion to being hungry. Or if you are desiring health, you have an aversion to feeling unwell or illness. And so we can look at this from many different ways. And it's very interesting when you start reflecting on some of the things that you desire and see the flip side of that coin. What is it really that you're trying to avoid, that you have an aversion to? Do you really desire this particular thing? Or is it really that you want to avoid something? So very interesting self-inquiry that you can kind of pull the thread and follow here. But speaking to raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion, when it comes to artha, tools, we can look at, again, desires not being wrong, but it's the labeling of the good or bad, the attachment that causes this suffering. What is our relationship to the things that we want? And often I'm using yoga asana, so the physical practice of yoga, to make examples or share explanations of these particular concepts. And that is because that is what I do. I share yoga asana with public and private clients. And so this is kind of where I keep my explanations, the focus on, but you can really look at these explanations from any approach, any practice that you have, anything that may be kind of consistent in your life. Kind of moving back into this idea of that the desire is neither good nor bad, it's actually neutral. We are the one that puts a label on that. You know, it's good to desire this, or it's good to desire that, or it's bad to desire something. And so when really that desire is neutral and that suffering, that longing, comes from a place within us that is covered, that divine part of us that is covered with this illusion that our worth is outside of us, that if we can obtain all of these desires and avoid all of these things that we do not want, or do not want to experience, again, this is tangible and intangible, then we'll be worthy. So speaking to yoga asana, we can look at artha as yoga asana as artha, a tool related to raga and dvesha. We practice yoga asana to begin to shed these veils, to clear these kleshas from the mind, so that we begin to remember our divine nature, that we are not separate from this place within us that knows and knows that it knows, that we are not separate from the world around us, that we're not separate from nature, that we're already abundant. And so our yoga asana practice can be a tool for removing these kleshas, for dissolving this suffering or this attachment to something or an aversion to something. When we realize that it is that I-ness, the ahamkara, the ego self, that is creating and labeling the good, the bad, the right, the wrong. And then also creating that sense of separation from our divine nature. So you've maybe experienced in your yoga practice, if you practice yoga, or again, anything that you may practice or that you're doing in the world. Maybe you're an artist, maybe you are whatever you would like to look at, a parent, a mom. We feel that when we do certain things or achieve certain things or look a certain way, that makes us worthy or valuable or important. And so again, back to the asana example, we may have a favorite yoga person, yoga celebrity that we follow on Instagram, and we really admire and look up to them and say, these shapes that she's making with her body or his body or their body, that I want to recreate that. That's a beautiful shape. And so we've attached this idea of this shape being beautiful. First off, we've labeled it good. What makes it good, really? Is it because it's Instagram worthy, it's good? But we want to mimic that. And so that's what we try to do in our practice. And if we fail to do that, then we feel like we're not a good yoga student, or that we're not worthy, and that our value and our worth as a student, maybe even as a person, is tied up in the ability or inability to recreate this particular shape in our body. What we have to do and remember is that yoga is not a work out, it's a work in. So we are, again, using an asana practice to clear the veils, to clear the kleshas, not create even more. And by clearing these veils, these kleshas, we begin to remember that our worth is already inherent. It's not tied up in can we or can we not recreate or mimic a particular pose. Same for an artist. You're putting on an exhibition, a show, and are you tying up your worth into how many pieces sold, or if you've got multiple artists in the same show, comparing yourself to how much they have been able to sell or what their work looks like, and are you trying to mimic their style as opposed to leaning into your own unique approach and realizing, that you're tying your worth to something outside of yourself. This brings me back to the idea of dharma, and I mentioned this in our dharma segment a few months ago, that from the Bhagavad Gita, there is a verse that says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it is better to incorrectly or faultily perform our dharma than it is to perfectly perform someone else's dharma. And so maybe we're not the best at our responsibilities or our purpose or whatever it is. But if we are aligning ourselves with our responsibility, with our purpose, that is much better than doing somebody else's responsibilities or purpose perfectly. So using yoga asana as artha, this tool to create clarity, to create discernment, and to realize that we are here having this human experience so that we can remember the divine part of ourselves. So the next kind of Yoga Sutra tie-in is one of the, from the yamas and the niyamas. And again, I'm referring to back to Nishkala Joy Devi's The Secret Power of Yoga. A lot of the language that I'm using today is from this beautiful, beautiful book. And so the yamas and niyamas, the yamas she defines as reflection of our true nature, and the yamas as evolution towards harmony. So we are looking at the yama of asteya, which she translates as generosity and honesty. You can also often see asteya translated as non-stealing. And specifically looking at Sutra 2.37, when one is grounded in asteya, material and spiritual resources of all kinds naturally become available. So material and spiritual resources, artha, that support, the tools, whether it's something physical like money, paper money, coins, whether it's something that's intangible like our courage, our curiosity. These can all be artha, all be tools. And so I'll offer also the translation by Joy Devi, abiding in generosity and honesty, asteya, material and spiritual prosperity is bestowed. And so asteya is this idea of, when we look at non-stealing, it's not just material possessions, it's anything. And she gives a beautiful example in the book. Let's say she says that you are scheduled to meet somebody at a particular time, but you are running 10 minutes late. And what happens here is that you're stealing time from someone else. And, many of us, all of us, probably feel very crunched for time, very busy, very rushed to get things done. And so 10 minutes may not seem like a lot to you if you're running late. However, 10 minutes to the person that you're meeting may seem like a whole lot. And so it's not upholding this idea of generosity and honesty. You're not being honest with your time or their time. And so being able to abide in this generosity and show up and be responsible. Dharma, adhere to your responsibilities. This is also asteya, is very much attached to when we're removing or clearing the veils, the kleshas, that we realize that many of our desires are often tied up in the ego self, finding value outside of ourselves instead of remembering our inherent worth. And so, our world, our culture really encourages us to achieve more, to accumulate more, because that's what we are told creates value, creates our worthiness. So amass more, get all the things, hold on to all the things, don't share, don't give back. As an individual, do what you can to take care of yourself and don't worry about anybody else. But that is quite the opposite of asteya. It's not generous in any way. It's tied up in our worthiness being attached to material possessions, things that are usually tangible, or the intangible things like power, influence. When we're craving those, when we're attached to those desires to have power over someone or a group of people, or when we want that influence or popularity, this is the opposite of non-stealing, of asteya. So again, this is often shown when we feel like we are lacking in worth or value. And so we begin to desire and become attached to things that we're maybe told or our culture tells us make us important. We can also look at asteya, the more subtle aspects, once again, time, energy, knowledge, inspiration. Asteya calls us to live with integrity and reciprocity. When we live in fear or from a place of lack, this is what's leading to our dissatisfaction. And it's that dissatisfaction, that feeling of lack, that keeps us grasping to the things outside of us. Again, this is where we lean into our yoga asana practice or whatever practice you may have as a tool, as support, as means, as that artha to create clarity and discernment and that remembrance of our inherent value, and that we do not have to tie our value to the things outside of us, to the ego self. So when we are stealing or we are taking time or knowledge from someone or something else, we are going against dharma. We are going against the cosmic order or the alignment with nature that is part of this universe and then a part of our journey here as a jiva, as an individual soul. We're stealing from the earth, we're stealing from others, the future, we're even stealing from ourselves when it feels like what we're doing is trying to get something for ourselves. We're actually stealing from ourselves as well because we're connected. So if we're taking from something or someone else, we're also taking from ourselves. So once again, yoga asana being a tool or artha that focuses our awareness inward so that we're able to dissolve the kleshas, dissolve raga and dvesha, to recognize these tendencies within us where we may grasp for things that are attached to outer worth instead of remembering our divine nature, our interconnectedness to all things, to our own inherent abundance, and that same abundance that is in nature, because we're not separate from nature. So here are just a few self-inquiry questions for you to maybe contemplate or journal about before we move into kind of a recap of artha and our last little experience here from the Yoga Sutra. So where in your life do you currently feel lack? Is it something that is connected to something tangible? Is it something that feels intangible? Where are you maybe feeling lack? And where you feel that lack, what is the desire? And what is the aversion? What is the raga? And what is the dvesha? And are you finding when you ask yourself these questions, is it tied up in something outside of you that is attaching your worth to something outside of you as opposed to that divine part of yourself? And this is not good or bad. Whatever you find, it's not good or bad. We have a tendency to label that to make it work in our human mind. But just that recognition begins to shift your direction a little bit, that awareness, that waking up to how you see things, how you're experiencing things, the habits and tendencies that you may have, and then also waking up to the tools and the means and the support that you have around you as well. Some other questions. Where do you steal from others? Where do you take from others or other things in hopes to create value or support for yourself? Where do you steal from yourself? And then where do you give generously? So where can you begin to see your relationship with devesha, with raga, and then asteya, that generosity, that honesty? And then we'll move on to kind of a recap of artha, and also this idea of santosha. Santosha is often translated as contentment. Joy Devi translates it as an agreement of faith that we make with our divine self. An agreement of faith that we make with our divine self. So faith fastens us to peace, no matter what life brings us, because we are identified with that divine part of ourself, that inner essence that's unchanging, rather than the external objects of the world around us. It's the faith in our yoga asana practice, or our meditation practice, or our creative practice, our movement practice. It's faith that keeps us coming back. And yes, we're going to see results as we practice and stay disciplined and dedicated and devoted to these things. But we still have to have this faith that something is shifting for us, that is supporting us, because we're not guaranteed anything just because we have a particular practice or we do something. Remembering back to Dharma and the Bhagavad Gita, we only have the right to our actions, our karmas, not the fruits of our actions. And so it's this faith, however we relate to faith, whether it's through a particular religion, through a particular practice, but this belief that something is supporting us and will carry us. And that faith is separate from the external world and the external things around us. So again, faith that we're going to have artha, that we're going to have support, the means to uphold our dharma, to fulfill our responsibility here, to move and walk in our purpose. Speaking of dharma, and I mentioned the word jiva earlier, our individual soul, our dharma of our individual self, our jiva, Atman, is to remember our divine nature. Again, we have this human experience so that we can remember the divine part of ourselves. Also, what we do in community with others is a part of that journey. So even though there's this individual aspect to the soul, there's also a universal aspect, the para-Atman. And so our healing, our journey is not done in a vacuum. It's not done by ourselves. It's done in a community with other people, other things around us. And so community is also artha, a means of support. I mentioned this last month in our bhavana talk about practicing asana in community and in a yoga studio, and how that has healing aspects and community support and community healing. It's healing on an individual level, but so also on a community level, a collective level, when you're practicing with others. The Dharma for our universal Pada Atman, the supreme aspect of our soul, is remembering that we're all a part of that pure consciousness, that we are pure consciousness. We are all worthy, we're all deserving, we're all interconnected. So all of this can be artha. We can look at almost anything as artha. It's just going to depend on where we are in our life, what we're experiencing, what our lived experiences are, and what our focus and desires may be at that particular time in our life as to what we consider artha, or what will be artha, support, means for us in that moment. So back to this idea of santosha and contentment. I was recently listening to a podcast with Dr. Robert Svoboda, and he was speaking to this idea of contentment. And contentment is not this thing that is related, or this feeling that is related to, we've had this particular desire or goal and we've achieved it, and now we're content to bask in our success, our comfort, the achievement of our desire, whatever that is. Contentment, true santosha, is being content no matter what life is bringing us. That contentment is very much related to our faith. The faith that our practice, whatever that may be, supports us. That our practice is the means, our artha. That faith, that belief in that what we are doing is moving us in a direction that brings us to that remembrance of our inherent worth and our divine nature. So just a few more questions, self-inquiry to leave you with, so that you can kind of explore this through the rest of the month if you so desire. Currently, what is supporting you? What is your artha? Are you currently focused on finances, monetary wealth, creating maybe a nest egg that is supporting you in your life and the life that you want to live? Maybe your focus is on walking your dharma, walking through life with purpose. What are the tools? What is the artha that is allowing you to do that right now? So what are the means that are supporting you most right now in this present moment? It doesn't have to be just one, it can, but it can also be multiple things. And if this is kind of confusing or you're a little unsure, think back 10 years ago. What were the things that you were focused on at that point? Are they the same as they are now, or are they different? They're most likely different. You might have some that are the same, but they're most likely different. And so kind of your direction, your trajectory on your path, your journey right now, what is supporting you? What are the means of that support? And if you practice yoga asana, how is your yoga practice supporting you currently? Or your meditation practice, or your journaling practice, or your creative, inspirational practice? You can apply this to all, just pop in the correct, appropriate word here for you. Has this practice changed over the past year? Over the past 3 years? Does it still feel supportive? Or does it feel like it needs to shift because what you desire and need now has shifted and changed? So if it's time for a change, what will support you moving forward? What's the support that you need now? There's something to be said for consistency in practice, and whether that be time of day, style of yoga, yes, we do need that, but then there's also a point in where our needs change. And so we may have to look at, okay, do I need to maybe switch up the style that I'm doing? Is there a different time of day that's more supportive to where I am in my life? And be willing to make that shift. It doesn't have to be a big giant shift, it can be gradual. So taking your time to just use your awareness to ask yourself what feels supportive, what is really supportive for you in this moment, and are you doing those things? Are you being responsible for upholding what supports you, what nourishes you? Or are you just kind of brushing it off to the side, brushing yourself off to the side and kind of putting yourself last? So just reflect on that. And then one last question regarding your practice. What is it that you need right now? What sort of support? And I may have put that differently a few questions ago, but just asking yourself, where are you now in your life? What support do you need? And is that support something that you're taking the steps to create or search out or ask for? Or are you leaning into maybe some old tools of support? Remembering things shift, things change. And giving yourself the permission to shift and change and grow along your journey, that compassion, that grace. Those are also artha, compassion and grace. So thank you so much again for taking the time to sit and listen or walk and listen, just joining me for the bhavana chat. Next month, we will be moving into the third purushartha of kama, meaning pleasure. I'm excited to bring this to you as well. And then tying all of these three purushartha together. Lastly, I'd just like to share a reminder about an upcoming event that I'll be hosting with Sarah from The Alchemistic. We are doing our solstice, summer solstice gathering Tuesday, June the 20th. It's in person here in Savannah at Align Savannah. You are also welcome to join virtually if you are not local. It will be from 6:30 until 8, so we're having a little bit of time shift this time. It starts at the same time, but we're going to end a little earlier. And we've made some changes that we hope and think that you're really going to enjoy. We are focusing more on ritual and embodiment of the practices. So anybody that attends will still receive the PDF, full color PDF with the typical tarot, goddess mythology, astrology, Ayurveda, recipes, ritual suggestions, all of those same support tools. But instead of kind of recapping the PDF in person with you during the actual event, Sarah's creating a beautiful ritual that will be guiding you through. And then I'll also she'll be guiding you through, and then I will be guiding you through a yoga nidra practice. So I hope that you will join us. More details to come in the newsletter, and the registration link is live, and you'll find that in the newsletter. And yes, let me know if you have any questions. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for being here.